Thank you all for standing by. Welcome to today's presentation, Introduction to Safety Management. This is the first of our three-part series on fundamentals of safety management. We will take questions at the end of our call today. However, you may submit them at any time via the questions panel. It's on the right side of your screen. If you're not seeing it, click on the orange arrow. It will open that up, and you can look for the gray questions bar. Click on the right-facing arrow to open it and type in your question, and we'll get to that at the end today. Our presenter today is Tim Leach. Tim is well qualified in property and casualty risk control consulting and brings over 30 years of expertise in public entity, healthcare, tribal government and casinos, academia, hospitality, manufacturing, waste and trash haulers, as well as general industry. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Fire Protection and Safety Engineering from Oklahoma State University and 2 Associate of Science degrees in engineering-related disciplines. He is a certified safety professional and a licensed property and casualty insurance broker. In addition, he is a member in good standing with the Association of Risk Management. That's the ARM designation. I'd now like to turn the program over to Tim.
Well, good morning to everybody, and good afternoon to you on the East Coast and Central America or Central states. We just want to let you know we really appreciate your trust and the fact that you would take time out in your day to listen to us. And so we really do strive to make sure that the information that we provide you is relevant, that it's interesting, and hopefully maybe something that even people that are seasoned that hopefully can take at least one thing away from every presentation that we do. So it helps you to enhance your efforts with regard to implementing, in this case, a successful safety program within the organizations you work. We really do appreciate it, and we thank you for your attendance. Today we're going to go over the fundamentals of safety management, the way I see it in many cases. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some case studies, as well as go into some fundamentals with regard to leadership and management principles, and how you can implement or use those to implement a safety program, or to enhance what you've already got in place, or maybe even recognize things that seem to be barriers within the programs that you now work in. You know, we always like to start out with a why. If there's no why, then there's probably no reason to go through it. So you know, if you look at things like finances, community and staff, community and family, production, regulatory compliance, and even in cases of within California and many other states, that they have civil and criminal charges that can be levied against you know, failures in the safety management process. You know, it's interesting, if you took the occupational injuries alone and you just lined up dollars. I did this because I heard it with a recent stimulus bill, how close to the moon you'd get if with stimulus dollars. But 192 billion end to end, the dollars would go around the earth about almost 9 times. So there's a little bit of cocktail information for you that probably you'll never use, or a dad joke maybe, I don't know. Absenteeism is big within organizations, as is property loss, 12 billion annually. And you know, it's important to understand some of these things, because some of these issues are the reasons that as we go through and we identify what drives leaders, some of these are issues that drive leaders from executive or top level management all the way into middle management within an organization. So having this information, understanding, even drilling down as you start to work through your program, drilling down on things like absenteeism that maybe or may have a you know, maybe a variable in your loss picture with the departments or organizations you work, becomes critical. So you know, hitching your pony to that wagon sometimes can help you through. And we'll go into some of the more detail of that as we get through this presentation. But first, I really wanted to talk a little bit about the civil issues, because I'm going to refer back to this a little bit as we go through the presentation. And this is a pretty famous, I like to not really post company names in here, even though it's public information, but this is a food processor in Southern California where they had these large ovens that employees would go into, and it's a confined space. and unfortunately, one of the workers was essentially cooked to death. It cost the company over $6 million. The operations manager and the supervisor, the operation manager and the safety manager were both levied with fines. The initial fines were $250,000, so they must have had good attorney representation that got them down. And then also had to do community service and probation. My understanding is that the safety manager went to another location where he had another similar incident. So, one of the things that we're going to talk a little bit about is defined roles and responsibilities within a safety management system. And if those aren't clearly defined and understood throughout the organization, it can lead to these types of issues. So it's important to understand that. I don't want to use this as kind of a, as a scare tactic, but it's important that we understand that's out there. So as we get going here, one of the things we want to do is talk about how do you foster an integrative approach. And the reason that I'll explain a little bit more of what I mean about integrative approach as we move forward. But it's really critical to a successful safety program and something that we should all be focused on achieving and what we do when we work with different organizations. Before we get started, though, I'd like to find out a little bit about where you guys are at relative to this question. So, Christy, do you want to do the first polling question?
Yes, I have opened up the first poll. It's not as verbose as Tim's. I couldn't get as much in. But the question is, what is your primary focus regarding safety in the workplace right now, if you had to choose one of them? So loss prevention, is it just focusing on compliance type tasks? Are you honed in on training and inspections, or just the safety goals are not really formalized right now? So let me know what your thoughts are on this. I'll give you guys a few seconds here to get your votes in, and hopefully technology will like us today and cooperate. So, okay, I'm going to close up the poll, get in your last minute vote there. We've got, okay, almost all of you voting. Okay, I'm going to close it up. And here are the results. 28% of you said loss prevention. 39% were focused on regulatory compliance. 25% training and inspections. And 8% stated that the safety goals and objectives were not formalized right now. Thank you all for participating. We appreciate that.
Yeah, that's really interesting because the American Society of now Safety Professionals, it used to be the ASSE, American Society of Safety Engineers, but the SSP used to do a survey on an annual basis, and they still may. I admittedly don't read the publication that often, but they used to do a survey, and what they found was that most safety professionals out there, I think it was over 80%, are focused on regulatory compliance alone. And while the reason I always found that a little bit interesting is because and we all take different avenues, right? And different organizations and industries have different focuses, whether it be regulatory compliance. So if you go into some construction industries or like a refinery or certain, like Dow Chemical would be one, they really have a focus on compliance, and none of the other risk factors and maybe losses don't really come into play when you work with their safety teams. We're talking predominantly here to public entities, and sometimes that can be the case there as well. Or maybe in a lot of cases, what we find is that there's not a focus whatsoever on a safety management system, and it just kind of rolls. Maybe it's by luck. Maybe they have people that are doing certain things, but what I've found over the years is that simply focusing on compliance really doesn't get you to where you need to go with regard to reducing losses. And if we're not reducing losses, we're effectively not really complying. The other thing I did want to mention is that while we're really focusing here on more of the, let's say, OSHA or employee occupational health and safety issues and programs, it's uniform. The same goes with property management programs as well. So the concepts and things that we'll be discussing here actually do apply across all lines. It's not just occupational safety and health. It is fire protection and the other areas too. hence the term safety management. So it's a management principle that oftentimes not understood within organizations. One of the things that I also find a little bit interesting is this idea that everybody's throwing around these terms, safety culture. And while I understand what they're getting at, I have a little bit of indifference to that, because in my mind, culture cannot be independent. Safety culture can't be independent of organizational culture. So it's not possible to have safety culture, a great safety culture that's not integrated into a management system within an organization. And because you're looking at the entirety of the organization from a cultural standpoint, not just one specific element. So for example, we want a culture of production. Well, there's a lot of things that go around that, right? Or a culture of service. Those are components within the culture of the organization. So what I rather, and again, I understand what people are getting at when they say that, but sometimes I think it's kind of cliche and they're just throwing it out there. But how do you really even measure that? How do you measure that you have a good safety culture? It's really, I could ask 10 of you, or there's some 60 people on the webinar right now, and I might get 59 different answers. But what we're really referencing is we're really talking about integrating safety into your organizational system. And that requires good leadership, management, and what I like to refer to, and maybe you've heard me mention it before, is the art and science of safety. Because science is really objective, right? Art is more creative and more expansive. Both are necessary to integrate a system within an organization. Leadership. I've also referenced John Maxwell. He's one of my favorite authors of leadership books. I forget how many he's written, but this one alone was over $1 million, as you can see on the slide. But leadership, in definition, really is no more than influence. So your effectiveness as a leader, it doesn't matter if you have people reporting to you. You can be an excellent leader because you're influencing an organization and not have anybody reporting to you. So don't get the terms, the term of management and leadership is not necessarily synonymous. You could have a manager that's an excellent leader, or he's a manager that you wouldn't follow to go to McDonald's, right? But that's what we are in safety. We're leaders in a sense that the best thing we can do within an organization is influence the efforts to improve or enhance or implement safety programs within the organization. If our influence is lackluster or not there, our effectiveness is going to be less so. So for example, I could be really good technically and come out to your location and conduct an inspection, and it takes me, let's say, a half a day to go through some areas and I don't see you for 365 days. Do you really think that inspection is going to have an impact on your loss picture, or even compliance for that matter? Because I can go out there the next day, or you could come in the next day, and everything that we corrected or talked about is back to where it was. So really, it's the responsibility of the organization, and how you influence that organizational effort is really going to lead you to success or lack thereof. Understanding what those barriers that are keeping you from having an effectiveness on the organization are really critical. The other thing within leadership I stole from another one of John's books was he wrote one referred to as 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, and I stole 10 of them. And here's some things to think about. So, and some of these are a little bit ad-libbed or adjusted based on what he puts in here, but things like, what's in it for them? So the people, you're a servant. We'll refer to a little bit of a servant leadership as well. But as a servant, if you're going to serve somebody and help them along, you really need to understand what drives them. So understanding what drives the organization, whether it be organizational initiatives, sometimes there's slogans or service components, things like that. Understanding those things really can have an impact on your ability to help the organization drive and use your craft of safety and health as one of the elements that help drive to that overall organizational initiative. starting small. I'm a big believer of using pilot and then replicating the effort, because we can use something on a small basis as opposed to trying to implement it throughout the whole organization. And if we do it small first and then we grow it from there, we have a much greater chance of success, because we'll learn through that rather than trying to navigate through the Titanic and then trying to switch gears or change. It becomes very difficult. Being flexible. Don't go into the organization with preconceived ideas just based on simply what you've learned in the past, because we're working with 5 different public entities right now on a similar project, but they're different organizations, and we're having to address and approach each one differently, even though the project is essentially the same as far as what their outcomes and the deliverables are, because we need to understand what's going on internally to do that. Connecting with a stakeholder. It's been said that you can buy technical skills, but you can't buy people skills. Enhance and work on those people skills. We all know that guy or gal in the organization that just attracts everybody. That's just they've got a dynamic personality. Everybody wants to be around them. You could be afraid of heights, and they could say, "Hey, let's go skydiving." You'd go raise your hand, say, "Hey, I'm on. That sounds like fun," right? Just because that person is infectious. So connect with the stakeholder. Make sure that you have a pitch, or your story, the statement that you're telling is perfected. Make sure it's perfected for the organization. I'm a big believer in telling stories. You can go back to biblical times, and not to get into faith and things like that, but Jesus used parables to teach. You can use parables or stories of what you've learned in the past in order to teach and learn from, and that's what I'm going to do here in a few minutes when we go into some of those. We've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Listen more than you talk. Present win-win situations. You do these things, you are going to sell yourself, and speak in understandable terms. As safety people, and just like any industry, we have acronyms that we use. We have references and things like that. And if you go in there with that type of those types of information to a group of people that don't really understand it, you'll lose them. I've had a client, I was with another consultant, a team member one time, and they were throwing out all these acronyms and stuff, and the person that we were talking to said, "Hey, wait a minute, I really haven't a clue what you're talking about." You don't want to get into that. So use terms and information and descriptive sense, so that it basically helps people to understand that maybe don't understand that safety speak or that vernacular. Getting into management a little bit, why am I talking about structural management? Because different management and organizational structures and how they're formed and how they are devised require a different approach to achieve the same outcome. I just mentioned the whole issue with the 5 different public entities that we're working with on projects. But functional management is something that really is product driven. So the product is basically, I'm sure if we looked at what's been going on with the vaccinations, they had a functional management system so they could get that thing out here, and fortunately it's doing some good out there. You got matrix, which is probably the most confusing, because you might have multiple people you're reporting to. I like to say, 2 heads, anything more than 1 head is a freak, because serving 2 purposes is going to really create some issues. But you need to understand those things, because it's going to craft the way that you put your strategy together when you're done. And then, of course, having a flat organization is great, from the standpoint of who do I talk to, right? Or matrix, it might be a little bit confusing. Then we have employee demographics as well. In unions, for example, working with one of these public entities, they've had an issue with cardiac issues with their fire department. And I started talking to them, well, what kind of controls? They have absolutely nothing. The union's not supporting anything with regard to maintaining health and fitness of their firemen and their fire service people. And it's like, well, geez, here you have your union members that maybe they, even in one case, this person's obese and he's responding to a fire. Not only does it put the public at harm's way, but that individual, and unfortunately, is several $1 million. The person died as a result of that. So sometimes it may be that you want to go through the union to try to make enhancements or improvements, and as difficult as it might be. And other times you just may need to comply, like some unions require that you have a safety labor or management labor safety committee in place. So you need to understand these things as you're doing your assessment. As far as additional issues, is as far as chance of success increases, the better that you get support up top. I think a lot of times there's a misunderstanding, and get into this a little bit more, but a misunderstanding as far as what the function of safety is and how it's deployed. And so having that top management report or support, really in all the projects that I've done, I've had 100% success rate with our outcomes, over the 30 years, with one condition. If management supported it, I had top level management and an internal champion, guess what? We were successful in our project. If they didn't support the effort and I didn't have a champion, then it just doesn't go anywhere. And that's not unique to safety. That's with any initiative or any effort that you put forward. Understand that as you go up the organizational chain, if you will, people are going to be more and more removed from individuals. So if I go to a CEO or a CFO or a city manager and I say, well, gosh, that table saw down there, it's out of compliance and we really need it, you're going to lose them. Eyes are going to roll back in his head. But if I talk to him about the cost to the organization that happens as a result of not having guarded equipment, and I can show him dollars and cents, he's going to go, wow. And then maybe I show him, hey, this is the cost to make these improvements, and there's a good return for this. He pulls a checkbook out of his and he says, hey, support it. So I know that's a real kind of general illustration, but you need to understand what the focus is on the people that you're working with. Again, so the higher you go up, the less influence on people. Now, when you get to a department supervisor who's got a really close relationship with his team or his staff, maybe he goes fishing with Joe on the weekend, or he has picnics with different family members from different of his team. That person's going to be more inclined to be concerned about the individual health. Not that the leaders or the executive and top level management aren't, it's just that they're removed. So you just need to adjust your message. When we talked about refining our message, we need to adjust our message for the people that we're working with. Just as I need to do that for this audience on here, okay? So when we're getting into the science of safety, what we're really talking about is, what are fundamental program elements? It's talking about the science says, hey, I know that a table saw, for example, needs to have a blade guard. I know what the controls are for ergonomics. They're very, very, very objective. It's pretty much black and white, and you can pick and choose as you need to. I know what the training is that I need to deliver. The art comes in as far as the things that we've been talking about, is how do you really go about implementing those things? Because if I go to, again, a flat organization and I try to address that organization in the same way that I address a matrix organization in my strategy, it's not going to be as successful, okay? The other aspect of that is theories. So I just put 3 of them up here: behavioral safety, Heinrich's risks theory and the domino effect. They're all theories within safety science, if you will. If I took a behavioral safety in its infancy when they started it, one of the big management systems that were huge at the time was total quality management. This was in the 90s. So total quality management was really heavily influenced by a lot of meetings every week, a lot of metrics to follow and things like that. That's when the behavioral safety came in. So when they first came in, I mean, you're talking about, meetings that just to ad nauseum as they would try to implement this system. Now it worked for a TQM organization, right? But if you took an organization, maybe a smaller organization, didn't have those types of resources, or maybe they weren't at the point where they should really even be implementing that type of system, it failed. It would fail miserably. But you can take elements within each of these and use those as you implement the safety programs. And I can give some examples of how we've done that over the years when we worked with different organizations, where we'll take maybe a behavioral safety approach, or we just take a risk reduction approach based on what the losses are, what management's like, the interaction between employees and staff and employees. So understanding those theories and taking bits and pieces of them as you implement safety improvement programs, they can be effective, but it's not a cut and dry every single time for every department. So you could take behavioral safety and maybe it works for your custodians, but it doesn't work for your construction team or your maintenance folks. Okay. So in a nutshell, we're talking about success and safety is going to be a component of both the management of the system and the leadership or the influence that you and other individuals will have internally, whether it be a top management influence or someone like I'm assuming most people here are in an advisory role because it's a staff position. Their influence on the organization. So those two variables are key in success to your program. So seek to understand. The other thing I'd like to say is, again, backing away from public entity a little bit, we often get when we're going after new business there, everybody wants, okay, I want a schools expert, or I want a public entity expert, or I want a manufacturing or retail expert, because we serve different industries, or hospitality. And certainly you can have expertise in those areas, but what I'm going to tell you is that the process is the same, regardless of expertise, regardless of industry, as far as what we're talking about is evaluating things. And I'm using a foundry in California as an example in this. I had an individual, his name was Bob, that I worked with at this foundry, which is kind of odd because it's right on the border of Newport Beach. It's not where you would expect to find a foundry. And then they had something out what we refer to in California or Southern California as the Inland Empire. He was the EHS manager. So can you imagine being a one-man band and you're responsible at a foundry for environmental, for occupational health and occupational safety, and probably security as well. And you can imagine the many hats that he wore, and he just was all over the place and couldn't achieve what he was that he needed to get done. And so he came to me and said, Tim, man, I need some help. I just really don't know how I can go about getting the things done that they tasked me with. So we backed up a little bit, and I said, well, hey, let's go. We did an offsite meeting, so we moved him from distractions. And I just went through this process where we identified what were the organizational initiatives, what were the expectations that he had on himself, what were the views of department and supervisors as far as what his role is and how he supported them. And what we did is we redefined all that. We created a mission for his organization, or just basically identified what his roles and responsibilities in the whole effort were. Worked with a senior level management to on the initiatives on what they're trying to drive, so that we could align the safety and occupational safety and health function aligned with the initiatives internally with the organization. And so in that process, and then we evaluated gaps. And after we aligned those organizations, and then we created basically a strategy prioritized based on need, based on organizational initiatives. And we worked with management to communicate that strategy throughout so that he had immediate support. Because he could go out to, let's say, a frontline supervisor says, hey, I'm not doing inspections, that's your job. And it's like, well, how am I going to do inspections for the whole entire facility on a monthly, weekly, or whatever basis? It's just not possible. So through that communication from upper level management, he garnered support from the first level management that he needed to get support from in order to be effective in how he implemented programs. And then creating metrics around at that middle management and lagging, what we'll get into is lagging metrics for the upper level management. And then at the employee level, or let's say the floor-based employees, kind of compliance with safe practices and processes and things like that, and holding them to account to that. It just worked like a well-oiled machine. I left that organization, and about 18 months to 2 years or so later, I get a phone call from him, and I'm like, hey, Bob, what's going on? And he says, hey, it's all done. And, so that gave me a lot of gratification internally, as did it. Can you imagine being in that situation where you put a strategy in place, and over 2 or 3 years, you're just basically ticking off boxes of things you're you're accomplishing, and then at the end of that 2 years, you put the big stamp on it, and it's all done. Wow, what a sense of gratification for him as an individual. And I was just happy to be a small part of it. So, that kind of system can really work and be effective. But I talked a little bit about some of his barriers and what he ran into. What are some of your biggest barriers to success? Christy, do you want to take this polling question, please?
Absolutely. I've opened up the poll, so I know some of you may want to click on several of them, but just select one. Is it the upper management support that you're lacking? Maybe your middle management doesn't have to take ownership of any of the safety responsibilities like Tim spoke about. Perhaps it's limited resources. Maybe you're busy putting out fires, or maybe you're just focused on the employee compliance with the programs, and that's taking you away from everything else, and that's your biggest barrier. So go ahead, get your votes in. I know it may take a second here to think about what your response is, and some of you may have a couple, but just focus on your top one, what that might be. So, all right, about 60% of you have your votes in, so I'll give you guys a few more seconds, get those collected. I don't want to go over today. I know there's a lot to talk about. So, all right, I'm going to close up the poll and share results. So 18% of you said lack of upper management support, 31% middle management, there was no ownership of those safety responsibilities, 36% limited resources. Don't we all feel that way? You're busy putting out those fires and not able to get to some of the things you want to get to. And then employee compliance, maybe that's lacking as well, and that's part of the problem. That was 15%. So thank you all for participating. It's certainly appreciated.
Well, thanks. I can tell you that I've worked for and in organizations where all those issues are prevalent and barriers. I think the one that comes to mind where I was supporting an organization of 1,000 people, getting to this upper management support, and it was actually for a large, well, it was Hughes Aircraft, and it was an organization in El Segundo. So there's 10,000 people on the campus. An organization I supported was 1,000 people. And there, when I stepped in, it was the organization that was the black sheep of that campus. So any new person that came on board, guess what? The person that was on it, exit stage left, and we're giving this to the new guy. And so what I ended up doing, and this was early on in my career, what I ended up doing was really spending a lot of time with the management team, because I had custodians, I had construction, I had facilities maintenance. So all of the trades that were in, and they're doing things like, compliance oriented things like, oh, we have safety committees. They were running 6 safety committees for this organization a month. And so once a month, I had to go to all 3 shift safety committees. There was 3 shifts for the employees, 3 shifts for management at the time. And so I started looking at all the things they were doing. So I went through and I evaluated the whole thing. And then I went to management and said, hey, look, is there a reason why we're doing this? And they're like, we think it's a waste of time. I'm like, okay, we'll stop it then. There's no reason for us to do it. I agree, it's a waste of time. And so, doing little things that sometimes as safety professionals, we see that, oh, well, we have to do it and we have to do it this way. I say no. I say, yeah, well, maybe you have to have a safety committee, but let's make sure that we design it in a sense that it's productive. And so we went back through, and essentially over the year and a half that a year and a half's time, we took them from the absolute worst safety performance in the organization to the absolute best. Now, that's not so much a pat on my back as it's theirs. And all it was for me was getting them to come on board and letting them understand some of those things that we talked about earlier, as that, hey, look, I'm here for you. I'm here to support you in your effort to achieve your goals, and so that we can just make it a safer, better way of achieving it. And it was extremely successful. And even to the point where employees would come to my office, if I was in my office, and say, hey, can you come out and take a look at something with me? Because I think I'm not sure how to do this safely. Absolutely, drop everything, get out of the 4 walls, which I love doing anyway, and jump in the cart with them, and we'd go to town. So it was a real eye opener for me. It was one of my first kind of little successes that I've been able to fortunate enough to achieve throughout my career. So you really want to, if you have that upper management or even the middle management support, you want to make sure that you're working with them. Now, there's certain things that you're going to have to do, but you want to make sure that you understand what they're really trying to achieve, and adjust, be flexible, like we said in those leadership skills. Adapt to them, serve them, look to them, within the boundaries that you can do that. So through all the years that we've done safety or risk management assessments, some of the commonalities that we find, and are the exact things that you're talking about, lacks clearly defined goals and objectives. If you go to upper level management with a good goal and objective and a reason to do it, they're going to support it. It fails to integrate in the system. I think if you talk about lack of resource and being a one-man show, just like I was for that 1,000 people, which we successfully did things, you're supporting the entire city, and you're a one-man, one-woman, person doing that. It's likely that you're not getting the support you need because they see you as carrying the full safety load. Now, if you've done it successfully, they'll see you as, hey, an advisor to the system and an influencer to the system. So if it's the latter of the two, or the former of the two, you need to get it from, hey, look, it's all my shoulders, to, look, I'm just one of the cogs in this wheel, and we need to work as a team to achieve these things. Really, as an advisor, you should be kind of creating programs, advising local or stakeholders, if you will, and then auditing things to making sure that, hey, it's working the way it is. An audit could be something like monitoring dashboard reports to, program implementation. Communication is a big one that is always seems to be lacking, is on the top of the rung, if you will. And then misconceptions, hey, we've been doing it like this for 20 years and it hasn't been a problem. Or they make statements that it really doesn't matter, accidents happen, doesn't really matter, and they just kind of take this that, hey, it's just the assumed risk that you have when you're in construction, or you're running a city. And I can tell you, those are false. That's a false conception on my, or perception on my point, because I've had enough experience. I'm sure a lot of you have, if not all of you as well, that you can argue that point. Arguing that point doesn't necessarily work, but if you're able to, again, start small like we talked about and illustrate, maybe you'll get people to come on board. Of course, there's always people that are going to be difficult to get on your team, right? And sometimes you have to look at things from a non-characteristic, and I'll just, in the interest of time, what I'll talk about here is on this is a hospital, and basically, you know, we worked with them and had success in implementing kind of no lift policies and strains and sprain reduction and that sort of thing. You know, you can see the numbers. There's 263 beds and 1,800 employees. They did have a couple people in safety. They were actually RNs. They had very much had an ergonomic focus, but you know, partnered with them, and it was really welcomed, and we achieved some good things around reducing strains and sprains and slips, trips, falls. They were what in insurance, some of you may or may not know the language of. They had a large loss retention. So in other words, they were paying for all their losses that wasn't transferred to work comp for the most part. But one of the areas that was a stickler was housekeeping, and it was around linen. And the way it worked is, as I recall, was that basically the linen nurses had a component of this, and they would overstuff these linen bags that would hang on the back of. They'd either be on rollers or they'd hang on the back of the bathroom door or what have you. But in a sense, what happened is they just overstuffed them, and it did a couple things. One is it made it more difficult for them to comply with their infectious disease control. That was number one. And then secondly, it also resulted in more strains and sprains with the housekeepers, because they're dragging these heavy bags through the corridor of a hospital, if you can imagine that, to the room where they would transfer it into a bin that either got put in a chute or where they would do the washing, and through that transfer process, pulling the bags and transferring into bins, that's where the strains were resulting. So we met with the director of nursing, and what we ended up doing was kind of hitching our wagon to the infectious disease control. And the reason that we did that was because they were on the level of status when the hospital was a much higher visibility issue than was occupational safety. And so by doing that, we helped and worked with them to improve their numbers from their audits for infectious disease control, as well as reduce losses from strains and sprains within the housekeepers, and get more compliance out of the nurses that just didn't want to do that because for whatever reasons. So my point being is how we got there was this process of understanding who's kind of king of the mountain, what the roles are, and how do we fit in there, because very seldom is safety the number one priority within the organization, as much as everybody wants to control and keep people from getting injured. But by doing so, again, that initiative is what drove the success of our efforts to make sure that the bent bags weren't overfilled, that they were transported properly, and that they used proper body mechanics when they're using putting them into bins and doing the laundry. So when you get to the point of doing that, and you're looking at metrics, so some of the areas that we look at is metrics, and I'm assuming that lagging and leading indicators are familiar to everybody, so, or up or downstream, if you want to call them that. So essentially, going back to what we talked about earlier about as you move up the ladder of an organization, with executives, they're going to be more focused on what's financially, how are they driving the organization financially, what's the impact financially. So those types of indicators are really key at the executive level. And as you move down that organization, you're going to employ a little bit more leading indicators. So for example, maybe within the housekeeping situation that we're talking about, you work in some of the audit that the supervisor or a foreman or is performing is going to be, hey, I'm going to spend more time watching my employees as they handle these materials to make sure that they're implementing the proper body mechanics when they're transferring linens, for example. So you've got that component, but you also want to provide them with indicators within their organization, lagging indicators in this case, that says, okay, not only are you monitoring these leading indicators and you're coaching your employees through the proper way of doing things, we're also monitoring the end result that it's having on the organization, and we can monitor that based on, not only just numbers or loss rates, if you will, but financial outcomes as well. So when the supervisor or department manager or whatever is held to that account, and the executive is looking at this information and saying, hey, why in the housekeeping department are your numbers increasing? That person's going to be more apt to look to you to help them implement these programs and these processes. So metrics are really, really key. And then when you get down to, say, let's say the labor level, where employees are expected to follow safe work practices or different processes and such, that middle management really is responsible, like we mentioned before, as far as monitoring that, but you're holding them accountable. So through coaching mechanisms, if it gets to the point where you need to discipline, that aspect because they're just ignoring them, and the training, and to make sure that the training that you provided them is actually implemented into their day-to-day work efforts. So metrics, dashboards, whatever you want to call them, are really key. Anytime we can have an objective measure, even if what we're doing is maybe a soft skill, turn that into objective measure, that's going to be much more impactful than just going about saying, oh, I'm doing inspections or I'm doing training or whatever. So let's take a situation, a kind of a hypothetical, if you will, and you become the safety manager within the organization. Maybe you were, you're promoted, or maybe transferred, or maybe you got hired in. And let's just say you got hired in, and you're all excited, and the first day you step on board, you're like, oh wow, okay, let's get started with work. And you find out that, hey, they've had a number of OSHA citations. You're the one guy or gal that's doing the work. You don't have a support team. You have no safety programs in place. You have limited formal safety considerations. Maybe there's a few SOPs for some things out there. They have a lockout tagout program, but they haven't done hazardous energy control procedures, for example, or they've got a contractor doing their quarterly fire protection system maintenance, but they're not doing anything on a week-to-week or month-to-month basis to inspect items or exercise valves that need to be exercised, and so on and so forth. So losses continue to increase. They've been going up because they're working on chance, and it's a newly created position. In other words, you're the first one. Now the benefits of some situation, and this I can tell you, in the five public entities that we're working with right now, there's 2 of them that are in this situation. So I'm going to assume that of the numbers on here, there's going to be some of y'all that have had some issues with OSHA. You're resource deficient, like was meant in the polling situation. Maybe you're not getting the support. So what do we do? How do we go about doing that? So the other aspect of this is that, okay, so we looked at losses. We're talking about occupational safety and health, so workers' comp for the most part. You're reporting to the human resources, and you find out through this process that in risk and workers' comp, that's where claims is. And work comp and risk don't talk to HR. because there's not this reporting process or procedure that's in place. So what do you do? Where do you get started? And you know, because it's like you've got this big old elephant, and where do you start from? You know, do you start at the front or the rear or the side? Where do you do? How do you get going? Now, my sense is that most individuals are going to jump right into a solution. They're going to say, oh gosh, we don't have any safety programs. I got to start working on these safety programs. So they get busy on creating all these safety programs, and they're in the office for 6 months, they never leave it, and all of a sudden they've created all these programs. Well, there's an issue with that, because you can create all these programs, but you haven't even talked to anybody out in the field yet. So this initial assessment prospect and aspect of what you're doing is key. You know, before you even start working on the programs, time needs to be spent out in the field, if you will, with the different departments, combined with some analysis internally, so that you can put together a strategy that over the, say, the next 12 to 24 months, you can take them from this kind of operation of chance to an initiative, a safety initiative, a purposeful, if you want to call it safety culture, or you want to call it integration, whatever you want to call it, to this organization that now has systems in place, so that you know that, hey, if losses have gone down, there's a reason behind it. It wasn't that, oh, nobody came to work because of COVID. Okay. So in doing so, it's important to understand the primary components of a safety program, if you will. So, and we'll go into what kind of generally is required within an organization, but so some of you that are from California, which might be a big group of you, you know, the one thing, and I'm not really, I understand the need for compliance, but I'm not that guy that reads chapter and book of OSHA. You know, I know where to find stuff and I do it, but you know, I think OSHA has their place, but I don't do anything with the purpose of simply complying with OSHA. But one of the brilliant programs, I think, that came out of California was the Injury Illness Prevention Program. And the reason I say this is because the components of that requirement, and it's not a very big standard, the components of that requirements essentially are those components that when I was in college, I learned that these are the components of a safety program. These components really do address some of the issues that we identified in the polling questions. Management support. It has to be supported by management. That's an upper level management that basically has a policy statement that says, hey, look, at ABC, the city of ABC, or at our entity, we have a successful health and safety program, and it's our expectation to bang, 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 right? From there, define roles and responsibilities. Again, going back to that food processor, if you will, define roles and responsibilities, or the lack thereof, was at minimum a significant variable in why that accident occurred, as well as why those two gentlemen in this case were heavily fined and had, you know, in some cases probation and community service. So if they would have redefined those based on the operations, I believe personally that wouldn't have happened. Accountability measures, hey, it's with all of us. We all know that we're going to focus on those things we're held accountable to. So if you're not held account to something, you know, chances are it's like, hey, look, this really doesn't impact my paycheck, doesn't impact my performance, you know, I don't need to pay attention to it. Okay, so if you have let's say you're that guy or gal that sits in there, writes these great, awesome programs, and then you get them out to there, and you get to the facility supervisor, and he's like, what do you mean you want me to conduct inspections? I'm not doing, that's your job. You know, so again, understanding the organization is going to be key as you develop these programs. So, but you got to have some accountability built in, and it has to be supported by the management level. Communication strategy, in some cases, this means a safety committee. Some of you may have safety committees, some don't. There's various degrees of success with them, mostly unsuccessful in my experience. Love to hear if you have a good one. What are some things that you've done that you've gotten garnering a lot of good participation from people on the committee? But a communication strategy is key. I'll talk to a CEO and they'll say, oh yeah, by all means, this is our policy from safety. This is what we're trying to achieve. And I go to middle management and it's like, hey, what are your goals and objectives? And they're like, don't have any. Well, that might be a real noble idea on the CEO or the city manager's part, but if it hasn't gotten communicated down through the ranks, whether it be to upper middle management and to the most earliest employee that's been hired, it's not going to be effective. Hazard identification and correction, those known as inspection, and of course, a good training strategy, and investigating accidents to reduce future likely occurrences. So, when I say start big, I mean start up top, working with the organization and then drill down from there. You need to identify what key goals and objectives, what are some initiatives in the organization, who and how people are measured for their job, how are they held account, is it a bonus structure, is it part of their evaluation, does it need to be part of their evaluation? But it needs to start at the top and flow down. And then 360 feedback. Don't ignore the opportunity. Probably your biggest fan and probably the ones with the most forthcoming information are the employees, the ones that are at the highest risk, the ones that they know the answers to I can tell you over and over and over. The more time I spent with the people actually performing the job, whether it's, maintenance on a valve or on a pump or doing construction, they have great ideas. Get 360 feedback, get their feedback, get their input as to why it is things are not going the way they are, and they will let you know. So interviewing those people all the way down through the organization is really going to give you a lot of great information that you can work off of. Okay, this interview, and I got to step it up because I'm running a little behind, sorry. But you're going to interview stakeholders, employees, and observe operations. Spend 80% out in the field to 20% in the office. And sometimes lose the clipboard. You don't want them to think that, oh, here he comes again. He's going to give me a laundry list of crap I got to fix, because that's not going to do anything for your cause. So observe for the information gathering purposes. Make note of, now the one thing I'll say, if you see an imminent hazard or something that could cause a significant injury, which is an imminent hazard, that obviously needs to be addressed right away. So in that oven, for example, if I saw the guy go in there, I'd be, hey, look, stop the phone, stop the job. We need to make sure this is addressed properly. Some of the typical programs that you're going to run into that are going to be in California, your injury illness prevention program, heat illness. I don't know if any other states have heat illness prevention program that can be part of your IIPP. The other thing on IIPP, since I imagine a lot of you are from California, is that recently, I think summer of last year, there was a new component, and that has to do with making sure that if somebody requests that, a copy of the program, whether it's their attorney or them, that you need to provide it within a period of time. So make sure that if you haven't looked at your IIPP or you need language for that, let us know and we'll help you out with that. And you can see the other programs here that could be related to. Conducting loss analysis. Get as much data as you can through Excel. If you're not skilled in pivot tables, get help with that. If you can have access to actuarial reports and things like that. But resources, you can call us and we can help you get them, carrier, your third-party administrator, and sometimes clients or companies have their own RIMS system, which is a risk management information system. Another key area that we find that is lacking for most clients is a hazard assessment. I'm happy to provide you with this outline for that, but what you want to do on a hazard, you have the hazard assessment, then you have job safety analysis. Job safety analysis reserve that for more serious injury potential. Hazard analysis is more overall encompassing. In this case, we did it for a distribution or water service operator, and this was all the things that he was exposed to, or he or she, and what's required PPE and training. And lastly, just to state, and again, I apologize that I'm running out of time here, but really spend time honing your leadership and management skills. I would say that what I think has been the most effective for my career has really been that alone, and that's through reading and listening. Now we got YouTube and all these other things you can do to make it a little bit interesting. You need to champion your cause internally with management. Serve other people. The greatest leaders are servants. It's not about my agenda, it's about everybody else's agenda. And do it conscientiously, like I talked about. Observe operations without any kind of expectation of going back and giving them a laundry list of recommendations. Provided some resources here. I'd just like to say that hopefully we're the first ones you call. We're more than happy to help you out, whether it be give you templates, review something, or bounce information back to you. So, and you can read, and there's many more than this, but I want to thank you all for your attention. I hope that this was beneficial for you. Christy, were there any questions that we can address real quickly?
There were. The person who asked it has left, and so we're going to get in contact with her later.
Okay.
So, but I did want to address the last thing. I think your next slide, because I do want to remind you all that you do receive a certificate of attendance for participating in all the live sessions in the series. These were the certificates that were given out to our participants from our previous series. That was our 201, and that was the Principles of Property Protection. So we hope you'll be joining us for these next 2 webinars that will take place over the next several months. So just a reminder of that. As far as questions, if you do have questions, please feel free to submit them. You can email them to us at riskcontrol@alliant.com. I did send that on the questions or the chat panel. So if you missed that, go back to that chat panel, riskcontrol@alliant.com. You can submit questions to us at any time. The next webinar is not until May. We do take a break in April, normally because people are gone on vacations. I don't know if you guys have any plans of traveling around the country. Who knows what's in store? But our next webinar is May 12th, and that is Observational Safety and its Value to Improving Organizational Goals. It's part of our series. If you need any of the handouts, please contact us. Happy to give that to you if you weren't able to download those. Great presentation, Tim. I know you had to shove a lot of information and a lot of great examples as well. So thank you so much. Great presentation.
Yeah, I apologize for going over, and that's my goal. Next time I'm responsible for one of these, that I'm going to finish in due time, because the last 2 I haven't. So thank you for your interest, though.
No worries. Some people are asking me for the PowerPoint presentation. Paul, I'll get that to you. Thank you so much. Any others? Let me know, email me, and I'm happy to get that over to you, because it is a big slide deck. So, all right, thank you so much. We hope you'll join us in May, and thank you, Tim, for an excellent presentation today.
Bye all.